Scaling a business isn't all glossy headlines and overnight success. It's messy, it's tough, and it's full of lessons that no one will warn you about, otherwise you wouldn't get started, right? I'm Nikki Judd, founder of Talent Gateway, and I've helped over 100 scale-up leaders to build the right team to enable them to grow with confidence. This is Scaling Stories Unfiltered, where founders, scale-up leaders, investors and others in the scale-up ecosystem share what really happens behind the scenes. No fluff, no filter, just honest conversations to help you scale smarter. Let's get into it.
What if there's some IP that business has developed, which could be of value to a completely different audience?
Yeah.
That idea of being able to ask the right question is going to become more and more important, because otherwise the risk is that we just get better at building the wrong thing more quickly, and then that's going to be a real big problem. If people don't feel safe enough to ask the right questions, it's going to be really difficult to get the right outcome. If people see that there's an expectation that you should know everything, they're not going to voice their concerns or whatever it may be when they've got a knowledge gap. But the reality is everyone has a knowledge gap.
Today we're diving into the world of technology, leadership and scaling businesses. My guest today has over 2 decades of experience blending deep technical expertise with commercial acumen. He's held roles spanning developer, mentor, architect, IT director and co-founder, and currently operates as a fractional CTO, Chief Technical Officer, and a strategic consultant for a number of scaling businesses. Graham's been instrumental in delivering transformation strategies for many scaling organisations, as well as brands such as Google, Intel, Kew Gardens and Imperial College London. I believe what sets Graham apart is his ability to bridge the gap between technical innovation and commercial goals. If you're a founder or a leader grappling with how to align technology with your growth strategy, this episode is for you. So without further ado, let's welcome to the podcast, Graham Roberts. Get ready to gain insights from someone who's been in the trenches with some of the most exciting and impactful organisations in the world. Now, without further ado, let's open the conversation. Welcome, Graham.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you for that intro.
So what I think is really helpful at the start of these types of conversations is to really understand your journey, Graham, into technical leadership. What's the backstory and what drew you more latterly to working with scale-up businesses?
Okay. First things first, I'm not sure I would advocate the route that I've taken because it's quite an unusual one, but I'm more than happy to share. So if I go back to the beginning, I wasn't actually expecting to be a tech guy, certainly not a tech leader. I was an academic. I was at university studying economics and finance, and I was expecting to be an investment banker or a management consultant or something along those lines. But anyhow, the dot-com boom happened, and around about 2000, I decided to co-found my first company with my brother while still at university. And we decided that I'd be the tech guy. So it was as simple as that. So from that point forwards, I probably spent the next 10 years or so learning a bunch of different programming languages, infrastructure management, system administration, etc., etc. Like everything you'd need to know to run a tech firm back in the day there. And then after about 10 years, that business, it was great, and then it fizzled out, and then I moved on to other things, and one of those things was to co-found a digital agency around 2010. So I co-founded it as the CTO, or tech director, as we'd called it at the time. And that's where we want to do loads of really interesting projects in the transformation space with some real big brands. Interesting, learn loads of different things about technology, people and management, etc. And then coming back to your question about working with scale-ups, over the last 10 years or so in the years after the agency, that's when I was working as a fractional CTO or transformation consultant. And it was working with loads of different types of businesses, founders, all the way up to really large membership organizations and small and medium-sized businesses in between as well. And there's really no pattern to all of those different engagements other than people had asked me to get involved. People that I'd worked with previously had said, Graham, we need your help over here. Or they may have been picking up a new client and saying, it's probably worth you having a chat with Graham. And that was really the only, and then I think it's in the last couple of years where I've started working with a particular type of company where I thought, actually, do you know what? That's something that I'd like to focus on. And I think that's the type of company that you would describe, a scale-up company, whereby they've identified a need or an opportunity to use technology where we can really take the business to a different level by making some investments in different types of tech and just changing the game for them. So it's been a very meandering journey, but that's how I got to working with this type of company. And I have to confess, it's largely by accident, but it's been an interesting journey.
As these things always are. And if people tell you otherwise, I think they're fibbing. Graham, we work with businesses either post-investment or if they've got clarity around their exit strategy. Sometimes the role of a CTO isn't always one that they understand clearly, and the value that a CTO can bring to a scaling business. Talk a little bit about when you think that having a CTO or hiring a CTO is the right time for a business that's going through rapid growth?
It's going to look very different types of business. I think you've got those businesses that are trying to make a fundamental advancement in technology, where quite clearly the CTO is going to be pivotal to that, and you're going to want them in day one, and they're going to be a key part of the business. That's not the majority of businesses, though. There are many tens of millions of businesses around which people might call them boring businesses, but they're what make the world go round. They're the businesses that we interact with, whether that's a home maintenance company, a shop of some description, any kind of service company. There's loads of these businesses. Some of them have been around for 10 years, 20 years, etc. And some of them, they haven't even thought about using technology. But that doesn't mean there's no opportunity for them to use technology. That's where at the other end of the scale, you've got the fractional CTO becomes really useful to those guys, because they've got so far without even looking at tech. They don't depend on technology to execute the business, but actually if they brought in some technical leadership, they may find that they're able to open up a completely new type of business. It might be that it transforms the existing one and makes it more efficient, or it might be that there's opportunities to open up completely new revenue streams. So it's very different depending on the business. Tech first, underlying advancement in tech, you're going to want someone very technical from day one, leading that. They're right in the trenches. There's other types of business where that's just not the case, but those businesses would benefit from tech leadership and awareness of what can be done with tech to modernize those businesses. So it's a classic answer. It depends. It really does depend. I think you've got everything in between as well.
Yes.
I think it's also worth saying that oftentimes it will change. There can be a point at which you might only need a fractional, and then that will turn into something potentially full-time. I think actually that's quite an interesting example.
Yes.
You can take your small, medium-sized enterprise that historically hasn't needed tech. They've done well without it. But let's say a fractional comes in, spots some opportunities to leverage their IP, do something else with their data, or just take advantage of a new opportunity that may not have existed previously. Now, that can actually open up massive opportunities.
Yeah.
That can lead to building out a whole tech team and creating a tech-first product, at which point you might say, now we've become a tech company and now we need a full-time CTO. So it can very much change as well over time.
So it'd be really useful to hear any of those stories, just to give us a little bit of colour about the journey, because as you say, it comes in various shapes and sizes, the tech requirement. It'd be really useful to share your experiences.
Yeah, sure. And a couple of different levels as well. So I'll often be approached by very early stage startups where they might have worked in a particular, which has given them a great idea for delivering something, but they don't know how to deliver it, and they don't know what it would cost to deliver it,
Yeah.
which means they they can't get funding, or they can't build a team because they don't have a starting point. So with firms like that, it wouldn't make any sense to try and bring in like a co-founding CTO where you've got to give them a big chunk of change and give them a big chunk of equity, when actually all they need is someone to get them to the next stage,
Yes.
which is, this is how to build your vision. This is what it might take. And then they're able to take that, they can turn it into a pitch deck, speak with investors, they can get support from a fractional CTO through that investment phase as well. But it's just about getting to the next phase, I'd say. So that's early stage startups. And I think a different type of business, the later stage ones that we touched on a moment ago,
Yeah.
those established ones, how do they go from running a great business where tech has either been, maybe it's not even a thought, could be an
Yes.
afterthought, maybe it's not even a thought. How do they go from there to thinking, all right, let's adopt tech? There's usually some catalyst for that.
Yeah.
It might be that there's a competitor that is taking a chunk of their market, or it may be that for some reason the business wants to raise investment. It could be that owners want to exit. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, we've seen that a few times, as I'm sure you have, where they might have even had a failed round.
Yeah.
And going through that due diligence process has thrown up, to use a great term, some opportunities for them to either increase the multiples that they're likely to get. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that side of things.
Yeah, exactly that. I think when someone's looking to buy a business, they obviously need to attach a value to it, and that's going to be linked in some way to the fundamentals of the business. And increasingly, I think tech is a key part of this, because if you take two businesses and one of them is efficient and scalable with high profit margins, that's going to look more attractive to a buyer than one whereby scaling up requires being in almost permanent recruitment mode.
Yes,
you're reliant, like scaling up requires adding people.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really key. Those three things around like scalability, efficiency, profitability. If you can use technology to drive those three drivers, that's pretty key at the kind of valuation stage.
Yeah.
And getting the best multiple. A couple of other little things that you can do. You can look at the market and the types of companies that sell, and broadly you could categorize them into boring ones and exciting ones. And in recent times, those exciting ones, they're the ones that we would have called like SaaS companies, for example. Business subscription-based business models. Scaling up is a pure tech play, less about people, etc., high profit margins. And so they sell for the highest multiples. And then on the other hand, you might have something super mundane that requires very little technology. The expected growth rate is low because there's no obvious path to really scaling up. Something like that is going to sell for a lower multiple just because the potential return is lower. But here I think is where the trick comes in. It's if you've got one of those businesses which is more the mundane scale, does it have to be a mundane business? Does it have to be boring? Or actually, with what's available now, let's say it might have been around 20 years, there's a whole new way of working now today. And it might be that, okay, maybe that business model is just destined to be boring. Maybe that's just the way it is. But just maybe it isn't. Maybe we can make it more scalable, could potentially take it to other markets. But what if something that business does could actually be really interesting? What if there's some IP that business has developed which could be of value to a completely different audience that doesn't compete with their core business? What if all of this boring business they've been doing for however many years has caused them to create a ton of data which might be really valuable to someone, which could be a completely different customer type again. So the trick here is there a way of taking a business that might sell for a low multiple and making it more interesting, more scalable, more efficient, and with more opportunity, so it can sell at a higher multiple.
And I think for me, it's having the right people, either be that on a fractional basis or on a permanent basis, that look at the business from both a commercial and a technical and a commercial and a financial and a commercial and a process. Those key elements inside a business to say, if our strategy is to either, and they are different, but either raise funds, and if so, what levers do we need to pull and make sure that we have in place once somebody lifts the bonnet on the business and says, how well is this being run? And the same but slightly different when you're going to exit. So back in the day, many years ago, I ran the commercial side of a number of due diligence processes. And that's how I would always describe it to a company. We are going to lift the bonnet on your business and we are going to see whether you have the right people in the right seats and that they're able to take this business to where you want to take it, whether that's exit, who's going to stay, who's going to go, what's the impact on the business of that happening. If you're going for investment rather than exit, it's very much around, do we believe these people can take this business where it wants to go? And then obviously you've then got the technology, the scalability of that technology, processes, contracts and finance. Sometimes there's the boring foundations, but the core of a business, they're not sexy in any way, are they? But actually that is what gives you the bit that you want, either the financial investment or the multiplier that allows you to exit. And I come back to how I described you early on. I think it's really important when people are in businesses at the inflection points we're talking about, that not only understand the technology, but it has to be blended with that commerciality.
Exactly that. And I think for me, this is why things have got, I'd say, probably more interesting on a personal level for me again in the last few years, which is because I'm more going back to that kind of commercial platform that I always expected to build upon. Personally, I found that really rewarding, finding a route which enables me to join the two together, which is the tech and the commercial side of things. I really enjoy interfacing those two things.
So it'd be really good if you've got a couple of projects where at the end of that project, you were proud of what you delivered. What was involved? What did you go into? Was it a mess or did you just spot an opportunity? Are there a couple of specifics that you could share with us?
Oh, gosh, yeah. And in probably completely different contexts as well. So if I go way back to begin with, so this is back in the agency days, I was less on the tools, building out a team. And I mean, we did some really interesting projects there, but one of the ones that sticks out was it's pretty transformative for Kew Gardens at the time. Back then, if you went to some sort of visitor attraction, everything was still paper-based. Your visitor guide was paper-based. And I think we must have created one of the first sort of digital visitor guides, which had that customized map with integrated augmented reality, so you could learn about the plants that you might see around the garden.
Wow.
It was just different to what was available at the time. And it was just great seeing a team delivering something new like that. But for me, from a different perspective of not writing the code, but of actually just seeing that project come to fruition. So that was really satisfying, again, because it was different and we created something which at the end of it looked great and just changed how people interacted with a longer
and ahead of the curve by the sounds of it.
Yeah, these days it just sounds run of the mill. But back then it was, I think, as I say, I think we were around about the first guy doing something along those lines. And then all the way through to other types of example whereby you jump into situations and maybe there's a load of just legacy noise which gets in the way and you need to sort that out first of all. You need to get solid ways of working. First of all, you need to get the business and tech able to trust each other again, reconnect, so that you can actually go on and do good things. I think there's been a couple of examples over the years where it's been pretty clear that the business has lost faith in the ability of IT to deliver for whatever reason. And the problem is that then means you don't capitalize on the opportunities that are available. So you've got to fix that. And sometimes it's just a case of people talking past each other or not understanding what different people need and different people want. So it's not always difficult to fix. Sometimes it just takes to be able to look at it through a different lens and see where some of these issues are going from, put the right frameworks in place, and then you can crack on and deliver some great results.
And often it's a language thing, I find. My experience is very much an individual having the ability to understand the audience. So often talking about technology doesn't work. And if it's not landing well on your audience, I think that there is a skill in being able to use the right language.
100%. I think probably over the years, I've been told that's one of, maybe it's the only thing I'm good at. Certainly I've been over the years. It's something people have mentioned is a skill, and you're absolutely right. You've nailed it. I've seen time and time again. I've seen business stakeholders with massive frustration that on the tech side of things, they're not getting what they want. It doesn't have the functionality that they're after. And not only does it not have the functionality that they're after, it took too long to build it and it costs too much money. And in the extreme case, there's examples where I look at that and I think it's a shame that you've got the wrong thing, but actually you've asked for the wrong thing. Like what you wanted isn't what you asked for. But it goes both ways as well, because I've also seen examples where you will have a technology team who will think they've understood what the business asked for, and they'll play it back to the business. But the problem being, the business really don't always understand the language that the technical team are using, and often rather than seek clarifications, they might make a few assumptions and they lock it in, and then you've got a build requirement, it gets billed against, and it's a recipe for a disaster, really. So yeah, you're absolutely spot on. That comms piece is essential. You need to be able to know how to ask for what you actually want. You need to be able to validate that process. And another thing as well is the tech guys, they need to know what the business actually does. That gives them a much better basis from which to design something for that business need, rather than just getting sent a set of requirements to build something. But yeah, absolutely, what you said around communication is spot on.
And have you seen in businesses how they've managed to put either processes in place or certain meetings or using a certain methodology to avoid that costly misunderstanding between both sides?
Yeah, it really doesn't have to be that difficult to fix it. Once you realize what the problem is, sometimes it can be remarkably easy to fix it. You just need to have a reset, put the right framework in place, which often is just a case of educating people in terms of how to describe what it is they're actually asking for in the right language. On the other side of things, it's about educating in terms of making sure you actually have clarity of a requirement, and if not, how to ask the right questions in order to get what you need. And it really doesn't have to be too difficult. I think where it's more difficult is when things have been bad for so long that just fundamental trust has gone. That can take longer to rebuild. But yeah, it doesn't take too many steps to actually put in an effective way of working. And without going off on a complete tangent now, I think one of the things that is going to be really interesting in the years ahead, as we have more and more integration of AI tools, AI coding systems, etc., that idea of being able to ask the right question is going to become more and more important, because otherwise the risk is that we just get better at building the wrong thing more quickly, and then that's going to be a real big problem.
And I think one of my observations would be that it can be a culture thing, and if left unmanaged, you can end up with silos that are talking at cross purposes. I think it's about working with, whether it's regular get-togethers, whether it's huddles or whatever terminology that business uses, where, to use your word, trust is built. And also that not being scared to ask questions, because I think that there can be that I should know. And that goes throughout the business. That isn't necessarily just someone who is more junior, who may well not have the experience. I think I've often seen it where even in senior level roles, people don't feel, I guess the terminology in the market would be psychologically safe to ask what they would deem to be a silly question.
Yeah, absolutely right. If people don't feel safe enough to ask the right questions, it's going to be really difficult to get the right outcome. And I think that word you used at the start of that passage there around silos is absolutely key. Like if you spot silos somewhere in your business, it's a pretty good sign that something has gone wrong. As far as tech is concerned, once that happens, it probably means people have taken some entrenched positions somewhere. And at the point at which you want to build something, you're probably just slinging a document over the fence somewhere and waiting for something to come back, because relationships aren't great, communications aren't flowing, and then it's not a great way of working. You're pretty much guaranteed to get an inferior result that way, versus when you've got some real good team cohesion, positive collaboration and communication.
And again, I think that comes down to, and you can tell me if you share the same view, I think that comes down to people in those leadership roles, behaviours, expectations, because that's how you build the right environment.
Yeah, exactly. I think if people see that there's an expectation that you should know everything, or there's going to be some penalty for not knowing something, then they're not going to voice their concerns or whatever it may be when they've got a knowledge gap. But the reality is everyone has a knowledge gap. And these days, it's more and more the case because the pace of change is only ever accelerating. There's more and more that people don't know every single day.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see that the best teams are whereby they are deliberate about bouncing off one another, learning from one another, sharing experiences, sharing knowledges. And there are so many benefits of that. That benefits the team, benefits the final delivery, benefits the business overall.
Yeah, and I think sometimes these are I'm going to use the word like softer things that I think we don't talk about. We talk about the technology, we talk about the finance, we talk about that. And sometimes culture is this sort of term that gets branded around and it's a bit woolly. But actually, when you strip everything back, it's so fundamental to have a business working well.
Yeah, I guess it's what knits people together, I think. It's how they know what to do to be part of that. Without it, how are people going to feel valued in what they're doing? How they're going to feel that their work is meaningful? It's all of those things. Without it, I think it's difficult to motivate a team and deliver good work.
Yeah, certainly in my world, it's really hard to hire someone unless you really understand that element. That's when you get the complete mishires because one's been unable to articulate the cultural environment that they need to operate in. And everyone loses when you get that mess, to put it nicely.
Yeah, but it's not a fun place to work, is
not
it?
For anyone.
Where that's lacking.
No, not at all. Not at all. So in terms of your growth and your journey on a more sort of personal level, how have you developed through your career? And how does what happens along that journey impact how you approach the work that you do when you're in these environments?
Oh, man. So, yeah, I've changed a lot over the years. And I think, as I said earlier on, I've meandered my way from like accidental opportunities.
Lots of people do.
That's punctuated 25 years for me. So I think one area, this is an interesting one, I think, would be delegation. So that first business that I founded back around the year 2000, at the time, we had a stated aim of seeing how far we could get without employing any staff, which interestingly actually is becoming a thing again.
Yes, I was just going to say that actually.
I think we might have been 25 years too early, but ahead of our time. But anyhow, it was great. And it was, I mean, I'm 20, whatever at the time. So it was great. It was an awful lot of fun. I know that being able to delegate to a trusted team, it would be a force multiplier. And where that business fizzled out, it probably wouldn't have done if we'd actually built up a team with different ideas and different skills, etc. So I'd say that's one of the things whereby I'm at the complete opposite end of the scale now. So back then there were a couple of us doing it, and that was it. It was like the me show. So what can I do in this business? Whereas now I'd be much more focused around, this is the mission, this is what we're trying to do, who do we need to make that happen? Like, much more aware. And actually, if I go back to the intro you gave earlier on, and I talk about what I did for the first 10 years of my career, I thought, right, this is what I need from a technical side of things. So I didn't think about hiring and bringing in people. I thought I need to learn that programming language, then that programming language, and system administration and infrastructure management. I just spent 10 years turning myself into someone who could do everything, but I can't give myself more time. That's one thing you can't do. So I'd say that's a biggie: delegation and team building. Another one, which again in hindsight slightly maybe not embarrassing, but it was a big lesson learned. That same business, we had one massive dependency.
Yeah.
And I'm not so much talking about a technical dependency, it's a business dependency. We were dependent at the time. We had a massive dependency on Google. And one day Google decided it was going to do things very differently. And it basically wiped out a massive chunk of our business overnight. So one of the things that these days I'm always on the lookout for, whether it's at a business level or a technical level, is like single points of failure. Where are they? What can we do to mitigate them? There are a couple of interesting learnings there. But possibly a more interesting, maybe a more valuable one is around empathy. It would have been 15 odd years ago that I co-founded the digital agency. And if I try and remember back then, I think it's fairly accurate to say that my view was that I went to work and to build the agency. And that was kind of it. That was my view. And I didn't really take time to think about people's personal lives, what pressures they might be under. So to build the agency, we need some people, we're going to do some jobs. That's kind of it. And then, so set up in 2010. 2011, things changed for me. Wasn't triggered by business side of things. I had a personal tragedy. My firstborn child, she sadly passed away. It happened in a really short space of time. Completely took us by surprise, and changed an awful lot of things for me and the way I saw things. And I think off the back of that experience, I became more aware of the pressures of life and people's hidden struggles. Whereas beforehand, I just wouldn't have thought about it so much. I'd have thought about, we're going to work, see some work, build the agency. And I think in retrospect, having been through that experience and now spending more time considering and thinking about other experiences, I think now I'm absolutely convinced that is a key ingredient to building high-performing teams. I think, and don't get me wrong, I think when I was building that team previously, I'd done a decent job of communicating a vision, getting people engaged. We were doing great work, which was all good. But I think being able to understand and feel what pressures other people might be under, I think that enables you to create a more trusting environment, like we were talking about earlier on. I think it's a good motivator. I think if people feel understood, they're more likely to be motivated to be part of a vision and go on a journey with you. And I think it also facilitates communication, much better communication, which is another key theme that we spoke about earlier. Because one of the things that I wouldn't have even thought about back then was if I was having a conversation, maybe it's a difficult conversation because someone's not conversing with me in the way I might expect them to, I might not have thought about why. I might have just thought, that seems like an odd thing to say. I'm not sure what we're going to do about that. But actually now I'm much more of the opinion that if something is different to what you might expect, then perhaps there's a reason. Doesn't mean there always is, but it's worth just giving a little bit of space just to see. And I think overall that can be a pretty healthy way to build a high-performing team, whereas I think that would have been a missing ingredient for me back 15 years or so ago. So yeah, that was a big learning. I made a note on one other, which follows on as well, which was a concept of indexing, which again was completely alien to me many moons ago. And again, I never stopped to think about what got people tick. I think for myself, I was indexing my career on building an agency so that in a few years I'd be able to sell it. That was it. So I'd pull all-nighters, I'd work during family holidays. I was always on because I was indexing on building an agency because I wanted to sell it and then would see what happens next. And then after losing my child, I think maybe subconsciously began indexing on something different, which was rebuilding a family. So I think I'd still work hard, but at times I'd find it exhausting. I knew I wanted flexibility. I knew I wanted downtime. And I think also for a period of time, I just wanted fewer problems to think about. And what's really interesting is now I can feel my indexing shift again. To a degree, I'm not letting it shift too much at the moment, but I can tell it's starting to want to shift. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds in coming years. But I think the other learning for me is that everybody is indexing on something different, whether it's family, social impact, travel, hobbies, personal development. They might want to run their own business one day. Maybe they're indexing to work towards that. The point is, unless you ask, you don't know. And if you understand what people are indexing on, you're going to be much better placed to integrate them into that high-performing team. So yeah, I'd say I've learned tons over the years, and that's partly because of the way I've just meandered from one thing to the next and just tried things, see what happens, see what works. But yeah, there's loads of learnings over the years.
They are fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for sharing something that's so personal, Graham. It's really honest of you and trusting me to share that during this conversation. Shifting back now onto myths or things that you believe or believed about scaling businesses around technology, obviously. What's one or two myths that you'd like to bust about the role of a chief technical officer in scale-ups?
Well, I think one is that the CTO should know the most about all things technical. I think probably going back to those, I don't know, 15 years or so ago, where I decided I had to educate myself on everything. Back then, I thought I need to know the most about everything.
Yeah, knowledge is power kind of mentality.
Knowledge is power. Yeah. When I was hiring, a big hiring mistake here, I don't know if I was consciously thinking, I don't want to bring people in who know more than me, but I certainly wasn't actively trying to bring in people who knew more than me. I was much more thinking, I'll bring in people and I can upskill with my knowledge. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think probably when that started to change, not too long after that, I made a great hire, which was ever thankful to a chap who made this introduction. But it became obvious quickly that there were going to be loads of people who knew way more than I could about certain topics. You can't know everything.
Yes.
And actually, the moment I thought, this is a good thing, I need more people who know more than me, that's a great way to unlock scale, unlock value, whatever it is you're trying to unlock. You want to be filled in a room with people who know more than you about stuff.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's a big myth. The CTO isn't the guy who should know the most about every line of code that's been written on a particular software stack. No. The CTO is there to be the strategic business leader, the strategic technology leader who interfaces with the
Yes.
business. It's a strategic role, it's a business role. So I'd say that would be one myth that I would like to bust about the CTO role.
Yeah, I learned a similar lesson very early in my career. I worked with one guy when I was working in the corporate world, and he was exceptional at building a fantastic team. He would surround himself. He clearly was very strategic about what he wanted his team to achieve. And at this particular time, it was setting up sort of a channel team. And he clearly came at it from what do we need to achieve over what time period? Therefore, what skill sets do I need? What capabilities do I need? What attitudes do I need? And that planted a seed for me very early on. And I use that in the work that we do even today. Gosh, that's got to be 20 years ago. I think he was conscious about it. And then people would just gravitate towards this guy because he was just then well known for building really exceptional teams. And they would always over-deliver. And they loved working for him. And I was fortunate enough to be in his team. And to come back and to add to one of the points that you were talking about earlier around sort of empathy and trust. This particular director would phone me up every week, 6 o'clock on a Friday. And my boyfriend, now husband, would say, I can't think of anything worse. So you're on the way to the pub on a Friday at 6 o'clock in your 20s. But I loved it. He clearly understood what made me tick. I don't know whether he did the same thing with everybody else, but he would phone me up and he would have the conversation with me about what's gone well this week, what hasn't gone so well, and then what can we celebrate? So that I would go into that weekend having offloaded any problems that I'd had, but then really feeling positive about the work that I'd done. He was just so good. And I feel very fortunate to, in my early career, to have worked for some great people that taught me lessons that I still use and value today. So
that's great.
Yeah, fantastic. I could go on for hours about some good people that I've worked for that really set me up for success, I think, without probably realising that's what they were doing.
That's great. I think that story also highlights, that's one of the challenges I've had to overcome, which is because I've just made stuff up as I go along and the way I've meandered, I've had to work certain things out by trial and error. And I think the example you've given just there is actually, again, by surrounding yourself and being part of other people's teams like that, there's so much you can learn. And I think that's a useful thing for people who one day might want to be a CTO, is to go out and seek those experiences, be part of those teams, because it will get you where you want to be a whole lot quicker than trying to figure it all out yourself.
Yeah. And for some people, that's uncomfortable to put themselves in those situations. So we're moving towards the end of the conversation. Just a couple more questions, Graham, if you don't mind. So what's one piece of advice you'd give a founder who's just starting to think about scaling their technology? And I know that's a very broad question because it will vary whatever that technology is, but just any advice that you could give.
Yeah, if you're looking to scale, you've got to make sure you've got the basics right. And I'd start on the people side of that. Have you got effective ways of working? Can you produce good work, pace, delivering what your customers want? If you've not got that process working, it's only going to become more broken as you add more pressure to it as you're trying to scale. So I'd be really focusing on there, making sure that you've just got a decent process, you've got a decent team, people are engaged and motivated and able to do their best work. The communication that we spoke about up above is a key part of that. I think you want to check that you're able to communicate a business need and see that turn into a technological output on the other end of it. And then I think similar on the tech side of things, you want to make sure you've got your basics right. You don't want to find that actually you're trying to scale up, you're pushing hard, pumping on the business side of things, but actually your development team, they're in quicksand because the code base that they might be working on has just become overly complicated, too much tech debt, whatever it might be, but they just can't move as fast as they need to. So I think it's about getting the right foundation in place so your teams can do great work, and so that you've also got a good tech basis on which you can build. I think both on the tech and the people front. If you don't get the good foundation, they both get harder to fix once you've got the added pressure of scaling later on.
From a tech perspective, what makes a business attractive to buyers during an exit?
So for starters, these things don't have to be necessarily linked to tech, but they very much can be. I think buyers like businesses that are efficient and scalable and profitable. So I think if a business is able to demonstrate that they are making good use of technology to achieve those three things, that's going to make it more attractive. If you're able to tell a story as well that says, before we had technology, this is how efficient we were and this is how profitable we are. And now after technology, this is the case, and you're able to demonstrate the improvement. That makes a big difference. If you're working in a defined category where you're going to get compared with other competitors, being able to tell that story and demonstrate how your use of tech enables you to operate in a way which your competitors are unable to match. Again, that I think that's a powerful story. Something else that buyers would like is opportunity that they are going to be able to exploit.
Yeah.
So if you're able to demonstrate also that you might have a roadmap of tech initiatives, and they could all be around making your core business better or more efficient, whatever it might be. But some of them may be more innovative. You may also have a roadmap that says, actually, there's this other product that we can bring to market. And that might be another product to sell more to existing customers, or it might be taking something that you're already doing and adapting it so you can take it to a different market, or maybe there's a byproduct of your business as usual, like data or some other artifact that you're able to repurpose into something else. Now, if you've got a roadmap of all of these things, you can't do everything overnight.
Yeah.
But if when you're speaking with a buyer in a conversation, you're able to say, this is what we've done over the last few years to really make ourselves scalable, efficient, etc. And this is what we're going to be doing over the next 3 to 5 years. And maybe you're then able to say, these are the 3 priorities that we're working on right now, but they're going to be able to see what lies ahead and the potential value that might create as well. So I think it's about demonstrating what you've already done to use tech to make the business better. It's about demonstrating what could happen beyond that, which they might like to take and run. And then probably the third thing is just demonstrating that you're also doing the boring stuff. Like, are you taking the time to check your cybersecurity is actually robust? Are your systems documented so they'll be managing? Are you able to demonstrate that you spend a bit of time managing your tech debt? Because certainly if it was me looking at it, I'd be thinking, if you're not doing the basics, what other skeletons are hiding in the closet as well? So I think in terms of prepping for exit, those would be the highlights that I'd focus on.
And then just one final question. If you have a conversation with your younger self, what advice would you say to your younger self, given what you've learned?
I'd have a really long chat with myself. Do you know what? I don't know, because on the one hand, I might say to myself, you could get where you want to get to way quicker going a different route. But then the other side of me would say, but you wouldn't have learned anywhere near as much. And I'm not sure which of those two wins. I think that chat we had earlier on around the learning, there's loads of things in there, loads of things around like the empathy, the delegation. I'd absolutely love to go back and open my eyes to some of those things a little bit earlier on. I'm sure I'd have had some more achievements if I'd just been aware of some of those things. But by the same stretch people's careers along. Sometimes you've got to learn the lessons and then use them. So
sadly, sometimes the tough way. Yeah. So look, Graham, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise.
And what I always like is you always do it with a smile on your face. And I've certainly learned a great deal through the conversations both that we've had in the past, but certainly from our conversation today. And just a big thank you from me for being so honest. And I'm absolutely confident that people that listen to this podcast will learn from your experience. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikki. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Take care.
Cheerio. Goodbye.
So that's it for this episode of Scaling Stories Unfiltered. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit the subscribe and share it with someone who's on their own scaling journey. And I'd love to hear from you, whether you've got a question, a personal story to share, or even want to suggest someone I might interview. The link is in the description below. Your insights could be featured in a future episode. In the meantime, why not check out some of our other interviews for some more real stories, unfiltered and true, about scaling a business. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.